Hello everybody and welcome to the Gaming Grappler. For today's video, I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite boomer shooters of all time, and that is Project Warlock. So what even is a boomer shooter? What is this mimetic term I'm just throwing around like it's candy? Well, basically, a boomer shooter is a fast-paced first-person shooter with an emphasis on high speed, mobility, and arena-based combat. It's a style of gameplay that originated in the 1990s with hit games like Doom and Quake, but just because your game doesn't come from the 1990s doesn't mean it can't be classified as a boomer shooter. Doom Eternal, and I mean obviously it is a Doom game, is an example of a modern boomer shooter. And Ultra Kill again is another example of a boomer shooter. And what separates these games from your more modern and typical contemporary game or shooter is that these are games that don't have chest-high walls, regenerating health, or iron sights. These are games where staying put is the equivalent to dying. You are always on the move in a boomer shooter, and there's nothing about the gameplay that slows down the pace of the game. You might be thinking that, hey, if this is a style of gameplay that originated in the 1990s, why the hell is it called a boomer shooter? Well, basically, shut up. Everybody knows that once you reach the age of 30, you mentally and spiritually ascend to becoming a boomer. You hate new things, and you shake your fist at the world because you no longer understand how anything works anymore. But before I can even get this review started, you know I got to get the obligatory channel shielding out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more my channel grows, the more time, effort, and opportunity I'll have to get you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. Before I can really dig into what makes Project Warlock such a fun and addicting game, we got to talk about what made the original Doom from 1993 such a good game. Because let's face it, if I were to put on this screen right now footage from Doom and Project Warlock right next to each other, you're not going to need to see a 3-part video essay series about the similarities between Doom and Project Warlock. I mean, let's face it, Project Warlock wears its Doom influence right on its sleeve. So before we can talk about what made Warlock so good, we got to talk about what made the original Doom such a success. And Doom could be considered the godfather of the modern first-person shooter. And while a lot of aspects about Doom haven't aged so good, Doom's core combat loop has stood the test of time. And that combat loop is about staying mobile, moving fast, and making on-the-fly decisions about what weapon you want to use on what enemy type, and what is the time and place to do so. Because let's face it, using a rocket launcher in tight corridors is not the best idea out there. Doom is about moving fast because staying still means dying. When your game's combat moves at such a fast pace, you gotta relay a lot of information to your players at a fast pace. That's why the developers at id Software put a lot of time, effort, and energy into making all the demons from Doom all have unique silhouettes from one another. A Lost Soul looks a lot different from a Pinky, and a Baron of Hell looks a hell of a lot different from a Cacodemon. All these demons require their own unique strategy for defeating them. Different types of weapons work better on certain types of demons. And the character designs are so good that even when the player is ambushed in an enclosed setting by hordes of different types of demons, the silhouettes are so recognizable that players can adapt to them on the fly and make decisions on a subconscious level without even really thinking about it. It's kind of how like when a basketball player suddenly decides to go for a 3-point shot out of nowhere and it just works. That's why when these demons returned in Doom Eternal, which released in 2020, the developers for that game really didn't have to change much. Doom did to 3D gaming what Mega Man did for 2D gaming. There's a reason why in the 90s, hell, even today, we are still aping this formula. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. In 1997, id Software made the controversial decision to bring the Doom engine and make it open source. As a result of the Doom code being open source, a new generation of gamers got into game development. And they did this by creating their own Doom mods in the late 90s and early 80s. This has never stopped. To this day, Doom modding is one of the most common ways people first start getting into game development. If you go on the Steam page right now, there are a lot of Doom-like first-person shooters out there that are flat out made in the Doom engine. Look at Hedon, for example. I mean, you could buy a game on Steam right now that was made using the same tools that made Doom. Project Warlock has the same sort of humble beginnings as a lot of these Doom mods, except it wasn't made in the Doom engine. Project Warlock was developed by a small team of young people led by 19-year-old Jakub Cislo. Most other people on the team were dedicated to making art assets like fantastically well-drawn sprite work and amazing music. But the bulk of the programming and the level design was done by Jakub himself. Now, the reason why such a young guy was interested in making a boomer shooter was because his boomer father drip-fed him a steady diet of 90s shooters. This kid grew up on Duke Nukem, Doom, Hexen, the entire works. Jakub started development of Project Warlock at the age of 17 under the working title Cataclysm. You gotta take this in for a second. This kid was working on this game while going to college, studying for exams, and learning how to code online by watching video tutorials, which feels a lot too common to me. When he finally released Project Warlock, he released it under a new studio he created called Buckshot Software. So just let's take this in for a minute. What the hell were you doing at the age of 17? I know I wasn't making hit indie games. You know, for this kid's first game, it's a pretty solid throwback shooter. Project Warlock is a more refined and mastered version of the 90s first-person shooter games we've all grown up on. It fixes a lot of problems those games had, and it elevated the source material. It brings back the appeal of 90s first-person shooters without any of the baggage, kind of like how Shovel Knight brought back old school 8-bit platforming, but without all the glitches. I'm looking at you, Ninja Guy. Does that eagle have to respawn every 5 seconds? I cannot tell you how many times I have died at this specific spot on every playthrough. But I digress. One of my favorite things about Project Warlock is the way this game handles difficulty is completely old school. With the exception of easy mode, when the player runs out of lives in Project Warlock, player death is permanent. And when I say permanent, I mean you have to start the entire playthrough over from level 1 with all your starting gear. On the highest difficulty setting, you don't even get lives. That just means you got one shot to beat the entire game. It is completely bananas and one of the ballsiest things I've ever seen an indie developer put in their game. And what this does is it encourages the player to explore the entirety of all the levels so they can seek out lives and have more opportunities to get better at the game. And I'm going to be honest here, I've got nostalgia goggles for this setting. It reminds me of how when I was a kid playing old school 16-bit games on my Sega Genesis, how I would try to beat the game as quickly as possible without dying once. It's completely awesome, and I can't believe it's here. I would just like to take a minute right now and talk about what's blatantly noticeable that's good about Project Warlock. The sprite work in this game is amazing. And while the enemy designs aren't entirely original, they're all inspired from Doom and Quake, they're a lot better animated than they were in those games. All the enemies, just like the original Doom, are easily distinguishable from one another based on their silhouette alone. And the animation just elevates it to a whole new level. I just like to say also that the music is off the charts good for this game. You have a lot of heavy metal tracks and a lot of old school DOS sounding tracks completely fitting the theme of the game. And I think that there's over 60 tracks in this game. I think they've literally made a song for every stage in this game. It's completely awesome. Speaking of stages, level design is one of Project Warlock's high points. All the levels in this game are unique and distinct from one another. You start off in a medieval fantasy setting and then end off in a modern military setting where you're fighting giant mechs and robots, and it's completely bananas. According to Jakub, 60 to 70% of game development went into designing the maps and layouts for all the levels, and it shows. Every level is completely different. One level, you'll be navigating tight corridors in a sewer looking for key cards. In another, you'll be in wide open spaces navigating monolith-sized bosses. It's completely awesome. My favorite stage in this game is when you reach the military setting. By this point in the game, you're approaching the end game, and as a result of that, the player has developed one of the biggest arsenals of spells, magic, and guns you could possibly ask for. You've got a fuck-off huge minigun, a rocket launcher that could shoot instantaneous rockets, a flamethrower, a quad-barrel shotgun. You can summon lightning, freeze everything in place, and the game decides to throw the most awesome enemies it can possibly dish out at you. You can fight skyscraper-sized mechs. It's just completely awesome. Now, the one stage I really didn't like in Project Warlock were all the levels dedicated to the Egypt theme. My main issue here is that the bulk majority of these levels, you are navigating tight corridors looking for keycards, and that just isn't that good in this type of art style. With all the walls being pixelated and all the corridors looking identical from one another and no landmarks to distinguish where the hell you're going, it's very easy to get lost. And you also have to keep in mind that most of the secrets here are hidden behind invisible walls. That means a vast majority of the time, you're going to be hugging every wall in the stage, mashing the space bar, and it's just a bit of a bummer. It's like we learned nothing from the original Doom games. All right, let's talk about the meat and potatoes here. The whole reason why you would ever play a boomer shooter is for the combat. And the combat in Project Warlock is what the game excels at. Even if some of the levels are not to your liking, you're going to have fun shooting the things in there. You play as a gun-wielding mage. Emphasis on the gun part. Because let's face it, going Rambo is going to be a lot more satisfying than shooting little wimpy pew-pew magic spells. The guns in this game are all satisfying to use. And if you don't like them, you can upgrade them into something better. You could turn a double-barrel shotgun into a quadruple-barreled shotgun. Or you can go full Predator mode with a Gatling gun. Or you could fire high-speed rockets instantaneously. It's just completely awesome. Let's not forget, you are playing as a warlock. While it is possible to spec your character into primarily using magic, the magic is best used in this game when it's a supplement to the gun-based combat. One of my favorite spells to use in conjunction with guns is the freeze spell. I like to freeze everything in front of me, then blast it to oblivion with a quadruple barrel shotgun. It's just completely awesome. You can also convert magic into bullets, which is one of the most fucking metal concepts I have ever seen in a video game. In Project Warlock, after completing a certain amount of stages, you will have an opportunity back at the Mage Workshop to upgrade your character, put stat points in magic, send your weapons and items through upgrade paths, and it's all very minor. I'm not a big fan of RPG mechanics in action games. I think they diminish the player's skill involved in being good because let's face it, you can toss stat points all around all you want, but the core gameplay is always just going to be aiming, strafing, and shooting. And the bosses in Project Warlock kind of hit or miss for me, but then again, that's just like my opinion for Doom. Now, some of the bosses are just bullet sponges that don't require any real strategy for beating them, other than using big guns and having all your ammo stockpiled. While others are so ridiculously hard, I have no idea how I ever beat them. The tank boss in particular is completely nuts. It's one of the hardest bosses in the game. All this guy does is ram you at high speed while you get flanked by respawning enemies. And a good boss fight shouldn't depend on respawning enemies. It should be difficult based on its own merits of fighting them. The final boss is pretty cool. Turbo Satan there has over like 5 forms you have to fight. But your player skill is really not going to be the thing that beats him, but rather how you spec up your character. At this point, ammo will be scarce. This guy has so many forms that you will be running out of ammo left and right. So if you want to beat them, I recommend upgrading your Holy Guard and using the magic spell that converts mana into bullets. It makes him a lot more manageable. Project Warlock is not a perfect game. But it is a good game, and it's especially impressive that it was created by a 19-year-old. And it is so good, in fact, that I'd like to say that it is a perfect entry point for Zoomers to get into throwback shooter. You'll start with Project Warlock, and then hopefully move on to Doom Eternal, and then hopefully after that, play Ultra Kill. And it's a pretty amazing game. It's always for a reasonable price on Steam and good old games. I think I got it for like $5. What's your excuse? So, this has been the Gaming Grappler. If you're new to this channel, this is a channel dedicated to talking about mixed martial arts, movies, and of course, the reason why you even clicked this video games. And if you want to see more of my content, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'll try to get to you as much content as I can reasonably produce at a given time. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the video.